so Moby Dick is close to my heart. Moby Dick, as it was originally conceived, a simple sea tale, but over time, and because of Melville's mind, I think Melville was the James Joyce of his day, every single thing became described and described. So you have really not just a tale in the book of a whale and the adventure of that, but you have a kind of sequence of what is really prose poetry, and which makes the book very dense and at the same time really worth reading because of the poetry in it. I've just chosen these two pieces, both about food, because I happen to love food myself, and I do always associate Youghal from my youth, from my earliest youth, with good food. Long before other people in County Cork got the notion of a food industry, Youghal was already really famous in West Waterford and East Cork because of a herons and its seafood. And I mean, one of the futures, I think, for Youghal especially, is in fact in food production, food canning or bottling, whatever you want to call it, food distribution, and definitely food promotion. I think that definitely is there in Youghal. It is, you know, Breslin and Donoghue, Asgreen and Bia, us an odd shop. And Quinta. Anyway, over his ivory inlaid table, Ahab presided like a mute, maned sea lion on the white coral beach, surrounded by his warlike but still deferential cubs. In his own proper turn, each officer waited to be served. They were as little children before Ahab, and yet in Ahab there seemed not to lurk the smallest social arrogance. With one mind, their intent eyes all fastened upon the old man's knife as he carved the chief dish before him. I do not suppose that for the world they would have profaned that moment with the slightest observation, even upon so neutral a topic as the weather. No, and when reaching out his knife and fork, between which the slice of beef was locked, Ahab thereby motioned Starbuck's plate towards him. The mate received his meat as though receiving alms, and cut it tenderly, and a little started if, perchance, the knife grazed against the plate, and chewed it noiselessly, and swallowed it, not without circumspection. For like the coronation banquet at Frankfurt, where the German emperor profoundly dines with the 7 imperial electors, so these cabin meals were somehow solemn meals, eaten in awful silence, and yet at table old Ahab forbade not conversation, only he himself was dumb. What a relief it was to choking Stub when a rat made a sudden racket in the hold below, and poor little Flask, he was the youngest son and little boy of this weary family party. His were the shin bones of the saline beef, his would have been the drumsticks. For Flask to have presumed to help himself, this must have seemed to him tantamount to larceny in the first degree. Had he helped himself at the table, doubtless, never more would he have been able to hold his head up in this honest world. Nevertheless, strange to say, Ahab never forbade him. And had Flask helped himself, the chances were Ahab had never so much as noticed it. Least of all did Flask presume to help himself to butter. Whether he thought the owners of the ship denied it to him on account of it clotting his clear, sunny complexion, or whether he deemed that on so long a voyage, in such marketless waters, butter was at a premium, and therefore was not for him, a subaltern. However it was, Flask, alas, was a butterless man. And this piece, which I absolutely love too, Chowder. It was quite late in the evening when the little Moss came snugly to anchor, and Queequeg and I went ashore, so we could attend to no business that day, at least none but a supper and a bed. The landlord of the Spouter Inn had recommended us to his cousin Hosea Hussey of the Tripods, whom he asserted to be the proprietor of one of the best kept hotels in all Nantucket, and moreover he had assured us that cousin Hosea, as he called himself, was famous for his chowders. In short, he plainly hinted that he could not possibly do better than try pot luck at the try-pots. But the directions he had given us about keeping a yellow warehouse on our starboard hand till we opened a white church to the larboard, and then keeping that on the larboard hand till we made a corner 3 points to the starboard, and that done, then asked the first man we met where the place was. These crooked directions of his very much puzzled us at first, especially as, at the outset, Quickling insisted that the yellow warehouse in first point of departure must be left on the larboard hand, whereas I understood Peter Coffin to say it was on the starboard. However, by dint of beating about a little in the dark, and now and then knocking up a peaceable inhabitant to inquire the way, we at last came to something which there was no mistaking. 2 enormous wooden pots painted black and suspended by asses' ears swung from the cross trees of an old mast top, planted in front of an old doorway. The horns of the cross trees were sawed off on the other side, so that this topmast looked not a little like a gallows. Perhaps I was oversensitive to such impressions at this time, but I could not help staring at the gallows with a vague misgiving. A sort of crick was in my neck as I gazed up to the 2 remaining horns. Yes, 2 of them, one for Queequeg and one for me. It's ominous, thinks I. A coffin my innkeeper upon landing my first whaling port, tombstone staring at me in the whaleman's chapel, and here a gallows, and a pair of prodigious black pots too. Are these last throwing out oblique hints touching Toffin? I was called from these reflections by the sight of a freckled woman with yellow hair and a yellow gown standing in the porch of the inn under a dull red lamp swinging there, looking much like an injured eye, and carrying on a brisk scolding with a man in a purple woolen shirt. Get along with ye, said she to the man, or I be combing ye. Clam or cod, she repeated. Clam for supper. A cold clam. Is that what you mean, Mrs. Hussey? Says I. But that's a rather cold and clammy reception in the winter time, isn't it, Mrs. Hussey? But being in a great hurry to resume scolding the man in the purple shirt, who was waiting for us in the entry, and seeming to hear nothing but the word clam, Mrs. Hussey hurried toward the open door leading to the kitchen, and bawling out, "Clam for 2, disappeared. Queequeg, said I, do you think we can make out a supper for both of us out of 1 clam? However, a warm, savoury steam from the kitchen served to belie the apparently cheerless prospect before us. But when that smoking chowder came in, the mystery was delightedly explained. Ah, sweet friends, hearken to me. It was made of small, juicy clams, scarcely bigger than hazelnuts, mixed with pounded ship biscuit and salted pork cut up into little flakes, the whole enriched with butter and plentifully seasoned with pepper and salt. Our appetites being sharpened by the frosty voyage, and in particular Quickling seeing his favourite fishing food before him, and the chowder being surpassingly excellent, we dispatched it with great expedition. When leaning back a moment and bethinking of Mrs. Hussey's clam and cod announcement, I thought I would try a little experiment. Stepping to the kitchen door, I uttered the word cod with great emphasis and resumed my seat. In a few moments the savoury steam came forth again, but with a different flavour, and in good time a fine cod chowder was placed before us.
Thanks, Thomas. Well, Mike, did Mrs. Hussey ever give you clams for tonight? Our next reader will be Sean O'Neill, and then Sarah.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.